podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Koval, and in our podcast, usually we discuss the different topic about people-centered approach, which we want to implement at all the organization globally. And today my guest is Leo Bentley from Barcelona. Hi, Leo.
Hi there.
I'm so happy to see you on my podcast. But before we start, could you tell a little bit more about you as a professional, your professional background and your current activities? It led my audience to follow you on LinkedIn at least and know you better.
Yeah, okay. So just a quick introduction. I'm originally English, as you might be able to tell from the accent, but I've been living in Barcelona for the last 12 years. And I work in employer branding. So I was previously a senior employer branding consultant, and then actually the global employer branding lead for Deutsche Telekom. Yeah. And then I moved to Fresenius, where I was the recruitment marketing manager for EMEA. And right now I'm looking for the next opportunity. So that's where I am at the moment.
Leo, today we decided to discuss the employer branding, employer brand management, and also a very sensitive topic about mistakes that company usually make in employer branding and employer brand management. And firstly, I want to ask you, why do you think when people avoid to talk a lot about mistakes? Usually we like to talk about success, but avoid to talk about mistakes. And why do you think it's important to talk about this?
Oh, first of all, I think it's a great topic for discussion. You're completely right. People tend to avoid it, which I think is only natural. No one ever wants to admit that they've got something wrong. You know, I'm a married man. I know that certainly in my married life, as much as my professional life, you never want to admit that you've made a mistake. However, it's really important to acknowledge those mistakes because that's how we make real improvements. The thing I always come back to with it is thinking about the aircraft industry. So every time that there's a major accident, there is a culture of let's look into it in the most detail. Nobody's necessarily to blame. So just be as honest as you can. That coming from pilots or from manufacturers and stuff. And that's how basically every time that there is a mistake or an accident occurs, the industry becomes stronger for it and safer for it because there is that openness about, okay, what was the mistake? What were the factors leading up to that mistake? And then how do we actually resolve that and make sure that it doesn't happen again?
My question is for you, what about employer branding, employer brand management? What common mistakes do usually you meet in your professional career in employer branding?
Okay, so
Not
there's
personally, but
three.
also from the
Yeah.
sides of the other companies. And so now we will not
Yeah,
discuss just only your professional background. It's
yeah,
generally
that's
because I
fine.
think it's very important to reflect the mistakes of
Mm,
globally. It's helped
yeah.
you also
So
to avoid your own mistakes.
yeah. So the three mistakes that I see most often, I would start off with, first of all, not viewing employer branding as something that's holistic. So we tend to focus very much on campaigns and creating good imagery and good taglines and things like this. But your employer brand is so much more than that. It's how things are felt internally, it's how employees communicate externally about their day-to-day jobs in your company. It's every contact that someone has with the company that you're working for. So even things as far afield as, for instance, when I was working at Deutsche Telekom, when people had problems with their mobile or internet connections, that can reflect on your employer branding as well, based on people's experience of working with you. I always think of something that I learned in my very earliest jobs, which was when I was working in bars and restaurants back when I was fresh faced and 18. And that was when you have a good experience, how at a restaurant, how many people are you likely to tell? You might tell one, maybe two of your friends. Oh, I went to this place, it was really great stuff. Now switch that around. Say you have a bad experience. You tell everybody that you know. Back then it was So you were likely to tell seven people. But this was before, complaining on social media was the thing. So now it's probably a much larger factor that a bad experience gets shared way more than a good experience. So making sure that people have good experiences is really key to your employer brand. It reflects badly on your employer brand, even if it's nothing to do with employer branding. And so you really need to be across all areas, all touch points. We don't often think about, for example, the onboarding process. That's often, completely different department, or we just let HR handle that, and employer branding doesn't really get involved in that. But I think that that's a really key area where you need to be there as well. Also, you need to be working with internal communications very closely because, again, that's another place where your employer brand is reflected, is with your internal employees. There's no point in going out to the external market with this great messaging if the reality inside the company doesn't match that. And when people speak to your employees, they have a completely different opinion about what it's like to work for the company. The second one that I see quite often is not being able to communicate effectively return on investment when it comes to employer branding. So I was very lucky in, for instance, my time at Deutsche Telekom, that we had a very large budget dedicated to employer branding. And this is something I fell foul of myself, was not being able to communicate effectively. Okay, for that money, what is the actual benefit to the business of that? I think because a lot of us come from the HR world, we tend to focus on things like sentiment and things that are hard to quantify, especially and give a monetary value to. So the things that I've always tried to focus on to combat that was, are we moving the needle on some of our most important topics? So are we reducing time to hire? Are we reducing the cost per hire? Are we increasing the quality of the application and the quality of the hire? Because all of those things, there are formulas that you can take and you can assign monetary value to. And then you can go to your CEO or head of HR and you can say, look, for every euro or dollar or whatever your currency is that we spend, this is what we're generating in terms of savings. And that's a really powerful tool when it comes to having to negotiate next year's budget, because that's something that we don't do very well in the HR world, I feel. We're very much about warm, fuzzy feelings and not hard numbers. And that's something that we really need to get better on. And then the last thing that I would say, and this is really my big pet peeve, the thing that I hate, is we're all kind of obsessed with this kind of safety. And I completely get it. No, if you stick your head above the parapet and it goes wrong, it's your head that gets lopped off, And I get that people are kind of like, I don't want to go too far out of there because then, it can all come back on me. But what I see is that's leading to basically a world of really bland employer brands around the world that don't show what's not only what's unique about the company that you're working for, but many of them, if you took the company's logo off, you wouldn't be able to tell necessarily not only which company it is, but which industry they work in. And that's one of the challenges that we face in employer branding, is that we're all trying to communicate the same pillars, essentially. All of us want to focus on career growth, equal opportunities. These are all things that we want to promote, but you need to find a distinct angle to differentiate yourself from your market. And I think the fact that we try and stay safe in it, and what I in English we call a cover your ass strategy. It leads to this blandness, and we have this whole process of really designed by committee. So it goes through so many approval processes that by the end of it, what you end up with is just like a bland soup of of stuff, and you don't really have anything distinctive and out there that grabs people's attention.
Absolutely agree with this. It's a common mistakes from one side. And for our side, a lot of these mistakes cost a lot for the company and to the people inside the company. And my next question for you, what could you recommend? For example, some people reflect what maybe something goes wrong. What steps should she or he do for fixing the problem and for handle this problem?
Yeah, well, the first step really is to really understand what is the mistake, right? So there's we can have a pre-formed idea of what that mistake might be, but it's not necessarily what the actual root of the mistake or error is. And that you can only really do through really good in-depth analysis, speaking to candidates, to internal partners about what it is that's having causing this effect. So your analysis will normally show something, say, we're seeing a decrease in the number of people applying to us. But why are they not applying to you? That's the thing that you need to understand. That's where you identify what the mistake is. This can be for many reasons. It could be something in your messaging is just a bit off. It could be, for instance, there's just been bad news out of your company. For example, Amazon
Mhm.
in the last couple of days accidentally emailed 16,000 employees that they were going to be fired. Uh, Not great. That stuff gets out into the news. It makes people second guess working for your company. So the first step is really understanding what is the actual problem that you're dealing with. Once you've got the actual problem that you're dealing with, then you need to come up with a plan. So failing to plan is planning to fail, as we like to say. That involves speaking to many different departments because it's never really something that's just nailed down by one particular department or one particular person. So you need to come up with a plan across the departments where you're all working together and pulling in the same direction. And then on top of that, monitoring and analysis. So just constantly monitoring, constantly checking, is this going how we want it to go? If it's not, why is it not? And it's an iterative process, right? So nobody's going to get it 100% right first time. It's going to get better every time that you do something new with it, and you learn a little bit more about your audience and stuff like that. So that's how you would deal with an issue.
My next question for you, it's about the first mistake. I want to discuss about a little bit more about mistakes about not holistic approach. For
Mm,
example, some activation without strategy. And because you worked in the past in one of the biggest company in Europe, at least. So
mm.
this is a common situation. For example, when you have for big companies, especially for international companies, or some particular chapter of company want to make they have their own ideas, they want to make some activation, and other have other ideas. So in the end, you have a lot of activation, as you said, but not a
Yeah.
holistic approach. Could you recommend for the global organization, especially, or a big organization in a country, but with a lot of employees included in the process of employer branding, hiring, and so on? How could you recommend to avoid this mistake, to handle these problems when you understand what you have 10 different types of design of
Yeah.
your employer brand materials and so on?
Yeah. So this is really something that you need to consider when you're designing your EVP. Part of that is coming up with really clear instructions on what kind of material is used in what context. For instance, do you use this kind of imagery for these kind of posts or not? How are those images made up? Because often, you're working with your global brand and there are specific brand guidelines. So if it doesn't follow that, they get angry at you because, recruiter in XYZ country is just posting something they've made on Microsoft Paint. The next step really is enablement. So you want to, as part of the rollout of your EVP, before you go live, you want to be speaking to these stakeholders in each country. So that's from the CHRO in that country right down to the recruiters, and you're going through. Okay, this is the material we have. This is how you can use it. Um, are there any particular needs in your country that need to be addressed that we can work with you on. It's really about creating a partnership with the local stakeholders. And another thing that I did when I was at Telecom that worked extremely well is, I don't want to say community, because community I think is now just applied to everything, but we built like an ecosystem for our employer brand. So we had our central employer brand that, basically we designed everything at a global level. And then we would have regular calls and meetings with our local stakeholders. Each country would have at least one representative on these calls or these meetings, and they were kind of like our local champions. But it worked both ways. So it wasn't just us giving out information saying, okay, these are the things that you're going to have to implement now. Here's the materials, just go off and do it. It was them coming to us and saying, well, say in Hungary, for example, we did this event where we were hiring people in the space of 24 hours. We did a special 24-hour recruitment event where people came, they had their interview, everything, and the decision was made after 24 hours, and it worked really well. So then we would have them in our meetings, presenting that to everybody else in the group as well, of saying, look, this is a really good idea that's come out of Hungary, and you can apply it in different areas. This is how they did it. These are the kind of things that you need in there. The other step that we took was we built up what I called the employer brand portfolio. So this was basically like a product guide where you could go into a central database and you could say, okay, I want to run a hiring event like this one in Hungary. And it would have all of the materials that you would need that were easily editable. For instance, we did it in Canva. So we would have it in Canva, the general look. And then, for instance, text could be edited to put it in the local language, for example. But the good thing about Canva is you can lock elements and stuff. So you can ensure that it stays on brand and they can still customize it. But the portfolio, what it enabled us to do was to be more proactive and offer more help to those countries. Because a lot of the time, the reason that they go off and do their own thing is because they feel a lack of support from your central team. And they feel like we don't have the resources that we need to do the things that we want to do. So it's about creating this central point where they have easily editable materials, they have guidelines, they have like a step-by-step guide. So it was, okay, we're going to be going and attending a university career fair. Okay, here are all the materials. These are the things that you need to be ordering now, and this is how much time in advance you need to be ordering them, and all this kind of stuff. And this is how we want to come across. These are the kind of language guidelines and stuff that we want you to use when you're speaking to students, as opposed to experienced professionals. And that's really how you get a successful localization of a global brand, is by having those people in the local countries that can not only implement the stuff on your behalf, but they can give you feedback about, hey, this particular kind of messaging, whilst that works really well in Northern Europe, in Southern Europe is completely useless. It's not the kind of way that people like to be spoken to in Southern Europe. And same between East and Western Europe. And then once you get outside of Europe, obviously the changes are much bigger. So, for instance, some of the countries I covered were India, Brazil, Mexico, the US. And as you can imagine, the communication styles between those different countries are vastly different. And the way that things are done are vastly different. So, for instance, in India, it's very common to have huge hiring events where you will just put out something on social media and you'll say, come to this place at this time, and everybody who turns up, we will interview you, we will look at your CV, and we will see if there's a job available for you. And that's very common in India. But for instance, in the US, not at all common. So it's about understanding those local nuances as well. And that you can only really do when you've got people on the ground there.
Leo, my next question is coming from you as a third mistake, but it's a little bit different. Usually we have two strategies. The first strategy is avoid risks, because the risks could lead us to mistakes. The second strategy is take risks and have a strategy for covering this risk and how we could handle it. From your opinion, which strategy is better and how to use it effectively? From one side, to stay connected with reality, to stay at the cutting edge of all the technology, of the ideas, to be outstanding, as you say, for be outstanding, to be visible. Times to times, they need to do something authentic for the company from one side, but also different for the market. But it could lead us in a situation, for example, we could try something and instead it was a mistake. What could you recommend?
So my recommendation is always be willing to push the boundaries of what you can do. And yeah, definitely have a plan there for if there's some error. So I'm thinking of an example from my professional from my professional experience, the first ever EVP that I worked on at Deutsche Telekom, we were all new to employer branding. It was a completely new function at Deutsche Telekom. And we had this great idea of, well, we need to get a better cultural fit for the people that are applying, because we were having lots of people applying that just didn't match our values and stuff. And we had what we thought was a fantastic idea. Let's really stand out. Let's go for the tagline of "Don't apply." So we told people literally, do not apply to this company. It was a bit more sophisticated than that. It wasn't just, hey, don't apply. It was, for instance, if you think this thing, don't apply. We're not the company for you. The thing that we hadn't foreseen was that if you tell people don't apply, they don't apply. So we quite rapidly started seeing a huge drop in the number of people applying. Our first thought was, oh, it's because we're telling people don't apply. But then we did more analysis, and what we actually found was, rather than it being because we expressly said don't apply, people saw us as being kind of arrogant and up ourselves. And that was something that really affected whether they would want to work for us or not. So from that analysis and from speaking to candidates, we decided, okay, look, we're going to have to change from don't apply. So we dropped that as a tagline, and we changed it to think bigger. Basically, it was along the lines of, if this is what you think, you need to expand your mind if you want to work with us. So all of our taglines were, for instance, if you think that, I'm trying to think of one now. This was so long ago. This was back in 2017. So I'm trying to remember the exact things. But it was things like, if you think that women can't be developers, think bigger. Because one thing that we were always very strong on was actually being able to hire women at a much higher rate than other tech companies. So obviously we didn't want to lose that. So yeah, you need to have a plan. We didn't really have a plan for when it went wrong. And that was a big learning from that, was we should have had a plan in case this didn't work out how we wanted it to. There were some signs that it wasn't going to work out that way. Some of us beforehand were like, I don't know about this, telling people not to apply and stuff. And so it was really a big oversight not having that plan. However, would I go back and change it? In a way, yes. So I keep the think bigger, but in a way also no, because it really did differentiate us from all our tech competitors. And I kind of believe in the old saying, there's no such thing as bad press. So it did get people speaking about us, so that actually when we changed our message, there were more people looking at that message in the first place that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Leo, it's so insightful, interesting conversation from my side. Time is coming so fast. But I have one last question, which I usually use for all my guests. It's a question about free tips. Free tips which you could get to the companies want to build a strategy how to really we need to work with mistakes in employer branding. For example, now what could you recommend that the company might not avoid the risks, take the risks, but also have a system which helps them to understand what are mistakes, how to handle it for them, and also have a continuous analyzing of their work and fixing the problems in the early stages. What could you recommend? 3 main tips from your side.
So, first one, be radically honest. So, I think that this is one of the reasons that we have a lot of bland employer brands right now, is that we're not honest enough. We try and only push the really good points about working for a company, and we don't acknowledge any of the bad points. And I think actually it can be a really strong strategy for attracting talent to say, hey, look, we've got this problem. We know we've got this problem. And this is what we're doing to actually address it. We're not just sitting on it and pretending it doesn't exist. The other things that I would suggest, get really good on determining a return on investment for your employer brand. That's going to just help you so much more in terms of getting budget. If you can turn around to the CFO and say, for every euro you spend on employer branding, we will bring you 3 in saving. Then a CFO is much more interested in giving you budget. And thirdly, I would say just learn stay on top of what platforms are being used for people to communicate and the way that they are communicating on them. So a really good thing that I read actually this morning was about how TikTok is no longer a place where people are doing silly dances or necessarily short comedy kind of things. It's a place where people are now meeting to discuss things. And I think understanding these kind of trends that you have across communication platforms is really important in knowing where to go. For example, we see with the explosion of AI now that a lot of people are using AI to research companies. So you need to also, as part of your employer branding strategy, be looking at where are those AI systems getting their information from? And how can we make sure that we're getting the right information to where they're picking that information up from? So it's opened up a whole new industry. In the past, we had SEO. That's still there, obviously. But now we have GEO or generative engine optimization. So this is, for instance, placing stuff on Reddit. Make sure that you've got stuff on Reddit because, for instance, ChatGPT, it's still one of its biggest sources for gathering information is Reddit. And that's something that I think a lot of companies ignore platforms like Reddit, for example, at their peril. I've run campaigns, for example, on Reddit before ChatGPT was a thing, and actually was really good for what we were looking for. If you're looking for tech talent, a lot of them are on places like Reddit, and it's not something that big corporations have really engaged with in the past. They've tended to stick to the big major platforms. But you need to be looking at where are people communicating, how are they communicating on, and making sure that you're matching the tone and you're using the right platform for what you want to promote.
Leo, thanks a lot for your advice. Thanks a lot for your insights. And thanks for participation in our podcast. And hope to see you again next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody who's attended. I hope you got something useful out of this. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions or want to discuss anything. I'm always up for a discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Leo. This is podcast Happy at Work. Stay tuned.